Recording in progress.
Good morning, panelists, speakers. It's exactly 10:05. We are going to start with our program. The chairperson of the National Heritage Council, Mr. Edgar Neduvalani, the CEO of the NHC, Ms. Luisa Mavi, the HOD for the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture in Limpopo, Mr. Mshwana, our panelists, Fathers Mangaliso Mkachwa, Ms. Nonova Pella, Dr. Mokhalera Mala, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, and all members of the media, Mme Charlotte. My name is Jane Mufamadi, and I'll be facilitating this program today. And maybe before we start, I just want to indicate and give some housekeeping rules. Firstly, to request all participants to mute yourselves and to switch off your cameras. Only when you are on the podium speaking will you switch on your video, and also will you unmute. For the participants, I also just want to indicate that you are welcome to pose questions, but you can do this through the question and answer room and not through the chat box, so that we can consolidate your questions and direct them to whoever you're posing that question to. You are also welcome to pose general questions that are related to the theme that we're focusing on today. We all know that the year 2021 is declared the year of Mme Charlotte Mannya-Maxeke. And this is really to ensure that her name, but also the experiences and also the values that she stood for, inspire us, and also we appropriate this to address the current challenges, but also to chart a way forward for our country. And therefore, we know also that Mme Charlotte Maxeke was one of the most resilient women who presented rare leadership skills. And I'm sure these are skills that today we really need in the current dispensation. But who can forget her commitment to empowering women, but also her commitment to empowering the marginalized and the oppressed? We will remember her famous words when she said, "This work is not for yourselves. Kill that spirit of the self and do not live above your people, but live with them or amongst them. And if you rise, bring someone with you." And I would just want to appeal that as we engage in this webinar and in these reflections, let's always remember, because the focus of today's reflections, it's really about that. What did she mean when she said this work is not for yourself? If we are in this current dispensation of lack of ethics, lack of morality, challenges of corruption. But again, what have we done to bring someone with you? The plight of women, the gender-based violence that we're talking about, the challenges within the corporate environment, in the social and also in the political sphere. And therefore, we also know that this webinar being hosted by the National Heritage Council, and I believe the NHC is the appropriate entity to embark in such debate, particularly if we look within our heritage landscape, because they have a mandate to advise and to look at the policy gaps and advise our minister so that those gaps can be addressed, so that where there are gaps, clear programs can be developed and implemented throughout our nation. In particular, if we want to keep our heritage alive, if we want to record it appropriately, but if we want to produce new knowledge that is based and inspired by those who came before us. Having said that, I'm going to move straight to our first speaker, who is the chairperson of the National Heritage Council, Mr. Edgar Neduvarani, to give us words of welcome. Mr. Neduvarani, you are on the floor.
Thank you so much, Jane. Thank you so much for running this program, and we believe that we are completely in your capable hands, and I think we've all started off well. And just greetings to everyone else, and thank you for being a part of this, and I believe there are others who will still join us on the way. But, I believe that, this is also our 5th event, that we have at the NHC, or hosted by the NHC and coordinated by the NHC. And I just really want to start by congratulating, the acting CEO and all our staff, and for the hard work, that they've put together in the midst of many trials, especially within the NHC, in the past 2 years. And I believe that we're getting to a place, where things are getting back together, and we're looking forward to a great future, that the NHC wants to position itself into, as an advisory to the ministry as well, but as a coordinator within the heritage sector. We really appreciate you so much for the hard work that you put into this, and especially for this year of Mme Charlotte Mannya-Maxeke, and the kind of recognition and engagements that we've had around her. And our last meeting, we've just reflected on the impact that, COVID-19 and the lockdowns have been having on heritage and places and the celebration thereof. And I think there were a lot of things to take home and to think about. And we're yet, engaged in another discussion. And these discussions offer us opportunities to really reflect, but much more than that, for knowledge generation, to generate knowledge on heritage and what is happening, but also to help us reflect and plan forward and position ourselves and foreground heritage in the context of our nation and Africa and the rest of the world. And I really appreciate you so much. And as we focus on women and especially Mme Charlotte Mannya-Maxeke, as our symbol for a great struggle, but great pioneering work and leadership. And I believe there's a lot we have to appreciate about women. Unfortunately, in the recent past, and as we've heard from our last family meeting with the president, how he focused also on the issue of women abuse as a pandemic in our nation, and we get stories after stories. I would also want us to position women as pioneers and as great leaders as well. Yes, there's that said element, but we shouldn't really forget what women are all about. I believe as you think about women, I see women as great communicators of heritage. I'm speaking this from my house. Unfortunately, I've got a few teaching aids that I want to use. I've got a few dolls, and if you can see this, this African doll, which always reminds me, and I've got another one here, and I have yet another one, and these always remind me of the role of women in communicating heritage and culture and promoting it and across our nations and the world. I believe you will see some of these materials all over the world. If you go to New York and everywhere, there are people wearing them, and this because of the initiatives and the hard work of women in communicating culture and heritage. And women are detailed and great storytellers, for that matter. Women are great promoters and models of our sounds and sights and beauty and diversity of our cultures and heritage. As I've said, and And I believe as we come together today, we are reminded of the good thing and the good thing that women stand for and that we should celebrate, and the leadership that has been exemplified, as Ms. Mfama would say, by women, especially Mme Mannya-Maxeke. The key among strategic objectives within the NHC is knowledge production, which this seminar will source from our esteemed panel members and will be stored and utilized to inform, educate, and disseminate to the general populace. This means that the NHC will be carrying its mandate of protecting, preserving, and promoting heritage in South Africa. It will be realized that this is the fourth, as I've said earlier, of such a public engagement hosted by the NHC to debate and lecture and dialogue around these issues. This is one of the highlights in the history of the NHC, of course, and especially in the context of the current lockdown, circumstances. So while the pandemic has been devastating, there has been some positives, and we should focus on those positives as well. And it is now, it now means that we quickly becoming a full member of the global community. Communities, even in the deepest of rural areas, can access these seminars from their phones and gadgets. And although there are still limitations in terms of data availability and access as well, we hope that in the future these improve so that people have access to this kind of dialogues without any limitations of language or technology. The World Heritage theme for 2021 is complex pasts, diverse futures, and for which it means that there is still a lot that needs to be done to redress the imbalances of the past in their complex nature, and build a nation through social cohesion and nation building through different initiatives. This fora and forums therefore means to that kind of, they lead us to that kind of end. Throughout the year, South Africa has been attending or listening to information about Mme Charlotte Mannya-Maxeke, or Charlotte Mannya-Maxeke, and the NHC has been no different in putting the name of this phenomenal woman on the pedestal, rightfully so. One will note that the theme of this month is the year of Charlotte Mannya-Maxeke, celebrating South Africa's intangible heritage as declared by the Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture. Those of you watching and listening realize that the topics that will be discussed have to do with women emancipation. And this is after, 27 years of our democracy, and which leaves us with a lot to be desired in terms of what is happening within our communities and society, domestic violence issues and abuse and killings and rapes and all these negative things that really makes one feel very sad. This is almost all that we speak about and talk about on a daily basis. However, this seminar will also look at the indigenous languages, which generation. Women are great, transmitters of indigenous languages. Some of our kids grow up in urban areas, miss out on their indigenous languages, mother tongue, because immediately they go to the creche and then go to preschool and they really just easily catch up on the English language and hardly on their mother tongue. And as women raise kids, even the women that we hardly celebrate, that we call our maids at home, our helpers, and are very instrumental in passing on this indigenous language to our little kids when they're still young. And it is to assure that, this event is to assure that you that the event is as an unqualified support from the council, the NHC council and board, and also from the ministry of course. And please, to all our panelists, we appreciate your input. Don't feel restricted in any way. We are an entity that promotes open-mindedness and open dialogue and critique, and and let us trouble the things that have not been troubled before. Let us highlight things that needs to be highlighted. And in our discussion, as we disrupt certain dominant ways of thinking, we bring in fresh ideas and reflections on what we need to look on and at and engage. And thank you so much. And I hope that our coordinator will also mention all the panelists, and we welcome you all and appreciate you so much. And obviously, our acting CEO will also give remarks at the end to acknowledge all our participants. But we appreciate you all and for your inputs, and I believe that this is going to be an exciting and insightful and a dialogue. And thank you. You feel welcome, and we appreciate you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson, for such warm words of welcome, but also for contextualizing the purpose of this webinar. And from what you said, it's really sad indeed that gender-based violence has become a pandemic. I was reading somewhere where they were indicating that South Africa has become the most unsafe place for women. I think that is a very sad state of affairs. You also spoke of preserving our heritage, especially the intangible aspects of our heritage. And my fear is that we seem to be bequeathing a legacy of the heritage of abuse. Hopefully, we will do something to stop such abuse and such heritage. I just want to reflect before I call on the Acting HOD, Mr. Mushwana, from the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture in Limpopo to give us a message of support. Just to briefly reflect on what O.R. Tambo said in 1984 when he was proclaiming it the Year of Women. He says that our struggle will be less than powerful, and our national and social emancipation can never be complete if we continue to treat women of our country as dependent minors and objects of one form of exploitation or another. Certainly, no longer should it be that a woman's place is in the kitchen. The woman's place is in the battlefront of struggle. Mr. Mushwana, you are on the floor to give us your message of support.
Thank you, Chairperson, for giving me this opportunity. May Jane Mufamadi. Let me start by greeting the NHC Chairperson, Edgar Nedwalani, and thanks very much for the opening remarks. Let me greet Father Smangaliso Mkhaltshwa and all our distinguished guests who are logged into this webinar. Greetings to you and all protocol observed, including my colleagues in the department. Thanks very much. My message of support is that, let me start by saying that like any institution in the world, the department is currently struggling to deliver its services to the people of Limpopo as promised. This is a global phenomenon. As it is, most people are getting used to the new way of doing things, communicating virtually. Facilitator, I want to add my voice to those that says that if you want to run fast, you can do it alone. But if you want to go far, you better join others. As the department, we are happy to be working with National Heritage Council. We have a common goal, that of promoting and preserving our national heritage. Obviously, the scope of work is brought to us to work alone. we really need partners. So the partnership with National Heritage Council is and will always be appreciated. I have learned that last event, which was held jointly at the University of Venda 2 years ago, was a huge success. I've also learned that there were resolutions taken at that event. I still want to see that between the three of us, those resolutions are implemented. It is of no use for us to have this kind of dialogue or conversation, take resolutions and don't implement them. Facilitator, as a department, we have an obligation to make sure that our heritage is preserved. Equally, we have a constitutional obligation to serve the people of Limpopo without prejudice. Our province is the second most diverse province after Gauteng. So our project to foster social cohesion and nation building must be a team effort. Both ourselves as a department and our universities should help each other to encourage our people to appreciate, encourage and preserve their culture prosperity. Our future generation should still know about our way of doing things, our languages, and our cultural dress codes. We are who we are because of all these things. We are not going to undergo metamorphosis. Otherwise, there is no reason for us to justify our existence as a department. We are a department responsible for the preservation of our cultural heritage. This event is not just one of those on our calendar. It is an important event. It is unfortunate that we are meeting in this fashion because of the current pandemic. We would have loved to meet with the Mme Charlotte Mannya-Maxeke family as they are around. We should, as a province, jealously claim this legendary leader as one of our own. We hear that one of her nieces has written a book about her. Would gladly like to work with him to promote that for young people to emulate her. Again, as I end, I want to say that the scope of our work on cultural heritage is too broad. We need each other. That is why we value and appreciate the relationship with the NHC and our two universities in the province. As we celebrate this day and this month, let us not forget to vaccinate. We want to fill the stadiums. I thank you, Chairperson. That is my message.
Thank you, HOD. And indeed, if we want to go back to where things are, if they will ever become normal again, we need to vaccinate. Such an inspiring message. But thank you overall for your inspiring message of support. And indeed, as you say, if you want to run fast, you better do it alone. But if you want to go far, you better do it with others. And I think this really cements the significance of this partnership for these initiatives. Because as they say, together we can do more. But in my language, they also say, meaning that it's only through collective effort that you can achieve more. And as you rightly indicated, we are responsible for preserving our own cultural heritage. Such important message indeed. I'm now going to move to our panelists, having received that message of support. And maybe let me briefly start by introducing our first speaker for the day, starting with Ms. Nono Vapela, who calls herself a vibrant and dedicated introvert, who was born and bred in Mafikeng and who studied towards a BCom degree with the University of South Africa. And she has worked in various sectors, in various institutions. She joined the then government pension administration called SIVO, which is short for Sefalana Employee Benefit Organization, as an internal auditor. And through her dedication, through her commitment and hard work, she also moved up the ranks in public service, both at local and provincial level. I'm hearing a background noise. I will request everybody to mute. And 20 years of joining the public service, she was appointed as the HOD for Culture, Arts and Traditional Affairs, which was later changed to Arts, Culture and Sports and Recreation. And she served a full term of 5 years there. Ms. Mapela believes in internal development, in mentoring and promotion of women, not because of their gender, but because they deserve to be promoted and uplifted. And indeed, in line with Mme Charlotte Mannya-Maxeke's vision and aspiration. In 2015, she summited the highest peak in South Africa, and her dream is to conquer Mount Everest. She also mentors young activists in her areas, assisting them also with career options, but also to become the best that they can be. Ms. Mapela, speaking of Mme Charlotte Mannya-Maxeke, and we know that through her life, she worked to create opportunities and equality for women in South Africa, where she promoted women's rights in terms of religious concerns, as well as we know that she was an evangelist. But with all her relentless efforts, South Africa is widely known for its scourge for gender-based violence. The chairperson alluded to this in his welcome remarks, and femicide as well, to the extent that, as I've indicated, it is notorious for being one of the most unsafe places in the world for women. I would like to ask that in your reflections, maybe looking at 150 years of Mme Charlotte Mannya-Maxeke and 27 years into our democracy, do you think women's position and role in society has changed? And maybe you can share why you think so. But also, how could culture impact positively on the transformation and evolution of women's position, particularly in the socio-economic, in the political, and also generally in other spheres where we know, we have seen statistics that inequality is rife in our country? You can share also based on your experience, because I see already you're working in these areas in terms of empowering women, in terms of working with young people as well. The podium is yours.
Thank you very much, Madi, and good morning to the chairperson of the National Heritage Council, and a very warm good morning to the acting CEO of the National Heritage Council, and to my former colleague, the acting HOD of the Department of Sport, Arts and Culture in the Limpopo Province, and good morning to the other panel members from Culture, Dr. Ramallah, and the attendees in general. Can I just request that the IT shares the presentation, please? Thank you very much. I really take pride and really appreciate the opportunity of having been approached to make a presentation and to make input onto this vibrant, this sensitive, this thought-provoking presentation or webinar that we're having today in relation to how far we've gone with uplifting women within our country. And I would like to start off by, posing the question as to what weight makes women of leadership or women of power in the positions that they hold. Generally, we know that women are driven by passion, they are driven by empathy, they're driven by compassion, and importantly, the willingness to see growth within the areas that they live in, the areas that they nurture. And when women activists marched to Parliament in 1913 and 1956, they were all driven by one urge, and that was the urge to see the change in the communities that they were staying at, to see the change in the livelihoods that they were nurturing, and the passion for growth. They were tired of being marginalized. They were tired of being left to fend for their growing families while being separated from their husbands and partners who were working in the mines and in the farms in the outskirts. And for those that were educated, they were working in schools that were in the outside areas of the villages where these women were. However, it did not just take one woman to do the march or to go onto the march. It was a group of them, as they had similar experiences in life that they needed to be addressed. And one such woman was Charlotte Mannya-Maxeke, who we have read and were told of her selflessness in developing and empowering the South African communities by breaking the barriers of association, the barriers of speech, and the barriers of learning. We are told that she had a rare leadership skill which she had shown by promoting women's rights and religious concerns and empowered women in the country. By setting up an employment agency for Africans in Johannesburg, she was the first Black woman to become a parole officer for juvenile delinquents. She fought for the establishment of laws, the laws that form the basis now of women empowerment in our country. And she was known for moral consistency, independence of judgment, and the courage to express this. In one of the interviews that were held with one of the great-grandsons, Ndabendilima, it is reported that Mme Maxeke broke the stereotypes of the family and that she strove to improve the education of women and have broken the patriarchal system in their society. Can I just ask the support to move to slide 4? In terms of the positions and the roles of women in the democratic South Africa, how far we have evolved and how far we've gone since the last 27 years. I take it that we can all vouch that to a large extent, the women's positions and roles have changed, in that they now have a voice and are represented in key decision-making positions, albeit not in the expected or documented numbers that they ought to be, particularly in the corporate industry, where only it is reported that only 7% of those positions are held by women. There's also a considered view that we need to do an introspection of our legislation, acts, and policies in order that women empowerment is addressed in a more developmental way that can be reported and that can be properly monitored. The one area of significance, however, where such women empowerment has been recorded is in Parliament. South Africa is one of the few African states that can pride itself in terms of equity at Parliament level. According to an article, Women in Power, What Do the Statistics Say? South Africa is ranked 10th in the world with a number of females in Parliament. As a country, we further pride ourselves to have made strides with the appointment of the first woman Auditor General, not forgetting that we also have the first female pilot in the country. I can't just remember, but the South African Defence Force also has, I think it's a competent pilot chairperson that has been appointed. Because I remember during the inauguration of the president, the lady flew the aeroplane over the venue where the president was inaugurated. According to a study conducted by Stats SA in 2016, the municipalities in the provinces of Limpopo Northwest and Eastern Cape led with the promotion of gender equality in terms of appointments. Despite women making up half of the population of the country, they remain very much underrepresented in positions of power and authority. And one can ask the question, why is there still not a woman appointed as a president of the country? Why is there still deliberations? Why every time a woman has to be considered for being appointed as a president are there debates? The question needs to be asked. Gender representativity remains below the 50% quota that had been agreed upon at some economic sectors. And as indicated, especially the non-executive directors of companies that have been listed on the JSE, where women representativity is only 7%. A worrying concern or a worrying factor that has been observed, according to Stats SA study conducted over the period of 2001 and 2017, where it is reported there has been a decline in the rural males and females who participate in the labor force. The study indicates that there has been a decline over the 17-year period of 5.1% and 4.8% of men and women respectively, whereas the labor force of the people in the rural areas remain constant. And with the current COVID-19 pandemic, we do expect that those numbers should have gone even down. The basis of this remarkable change, the women empowerment, the improvement in the women's statistics, represented statistics, can be attributed to the implementation of a number of legislation and programs that were developed for the deliberate advancement of women post-1994. These are but not limited to the Freedom Charter, the National Development Plan, which recognizes the empowerment of women as central to the development agenda, the Affirmative Action Act of 1998, which at its inception had its own criticisms, as well as the Employment Equity Act of 1998 as amended. There are also developmental and educational programs that specifically target women in leadership or management positions that have been introduced, and some of them have even been introduced online. Credit should also be given the various women's structures, be it at the government or community-based level, that were established for the empowerment and the advancement of women. Like the women who took the march against the passes during the apartheid era, these women structured themselves for the purpose of changing the economic landscape and the livelihoods of the communities. The theme for the 2021 Women's Month was economic justice, from poverty to generational wealth for women, the way of Charlotte Mannya-Maxeke, COVID-19 and gender-based violence pandemic. To this day, women are still confronted by the harsh realities of domestic violence, discrimination and harassment at the workplace, equal pay, education for girls, and more. Gender-based violence is now even dubbed the second pandemic after the scourge of COVID-19. On the issue of GBV and femicide, the question that should be answered is, how are we doing things differently to ensure that women and girl children are not victims of this pandemic? There are plans that have been brought to the table. There are strategies that have been brought to the table. The government has come up with strategies such as preventing GBV, which require operational plans to be implemented, to strengthen the criminal justice, to enhance the legal policy and framework, ensure adequate care, support, and healing to the victims, measures to improve the economic power of women in South Africa. The question then comes to say, have these plans achieved the desired outcome? Why are we still faced with
Recording in progress.
Facilitate an inclusive economy. This therefore begs of government to keep its commitment in line with Charlotte Maxeke's counsel that this work is not for yourself. Feel that spirit of self and do not live above your people, but live for them. If you can rise, bring someone. In trying to address what the positive impact that culture can have on the transformation or evolution of women's position, one needs to look back at what we've been told about Mme Charlotte Mannya-Maxeke as to how she brought women together. That spirit of togetherness, that urge of wanting to bring change within the community, where people or the women would then be brought together to stand up and take the march against the past. And it was one of the values that she held, that value of togetherness, the meeting of the minds on a common issue. In our current days, we have a classical example of women getting together for purposes that is not fair. And some of us are beneficiaries by the society, limited society. But what seems to be lacking is the economic aspect that still needs to be improved. We know for there are other women out there that have formed stock firms to buy property that are living outright. But let us spread that. Those that have made it, let us spread that to other women, particularly the women in the rural areas, who can actually even benefit from being given the land to plow, to produce agricultural material from it that can be exported and that can be used within the country. I recently listened to an interview that was held with Shahrazad Ali, who is the author of The Black Man's Guide to Understanding the Black Woman. She says that the premise of the book is the disrespect and the rebellion of a Black woman against the leadership and authority of a Black man, which happens to be a direct cause of the breakdown in the Black woman structure. She further says that where both parties have to be responsible for the breakdown of the relationship, the women have been protected and insulated from what would women share as their responsibility in the breakdown. And the Black man has not been given that opportunity to air his grievances about what he says the Black woman troubles him with. No one would listen. Only the women are listened to. And I'm saying that the culture of tigers don't cry needs to change for a society, and particularly women, to understand the deep-rooted issues that men have against women. One leader from Namibia bemoaned about the ethics of leadership that we have lost. The lack of empathy, greed, and self-gratification. An African child has an identity and dignity. The identity and dignity lies with the traditional village or the roots that he or she comes from, or his or her parents were born in. And upholding the name and the values of Africanism is important in empowering Africanism. It is not about being submissive, but ensuring that the proverb is given life. Women can further develop and empower themselves with the one thing our foremothers strive for, which is agriculture. Understanding the technological advancement that has taken place over the years, women, and especially those in the rural areas, can take advantage of the educational programs that government offers to empower themselves to effectively contribute to the economy and to the labor force without having to urbanize themselves or without even having to move from where they are staying. Instead, to build the communities where they are staying. On that note, Chairperson, I'd like to thank you, but I'd like to pay special gratitude to the following people that have contributed to this presentation. Mme Charlotte, who is the Chief Director of Corporate Services at the Northwest Department of Public Works. Mr. Rick Rapo, who is the Director of Financial Support at the DPSA. Ms. Rabafida Ngao, who is the Managing Director of Yema Ideas, based in the Eastern Cape. Mr. Andile Capella, who is the Northwest Provincial Head at the Department of Labour. And Honorable Bitele Pan, who is the Secretary or the Provincial Secretary of the Women's League, ANC Women's League. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Mapela, for such inspiring reflections. You have touched across various sectors. You've given us the historical background, but you have also reflected on the current issues and challenges. I like the fact that you were able to draw clear comparisons with what the generation of Mme Charlotte Mannya-Maxeke stood for. You raised issues around introspection of legislation, your suggestion that this should be reflected on or looked at from a developmental stage point of view. You draw parallels in terms of women then being marginalized and women currently still being marginalized, but also the issues around togetherness, the spirit of togetherness and doing things collectively, like the generation of Mme Charlotte Mannya-Maxeke did. Also, you asked questions, how are we doing things differently? And I hope, and I'm sure during the deliberations, these are some of the aspects that we'll zoom into in terms of probing them further. Having said that, I'm going to move to our next speaker. Our next panelist is Dr. Mogale Rammala from the University of Limpopo. Dr. Rammala became a teacher in 1980, and he studied linguistics and English up to honors level at the University of Limpopo. He did his MA in English at Warwick University in the UK, and thereafter he did a PhD at the University of Pretoria in sociolinguistics. As a lecturer, he taught sociolinguistics, especially language planning, semantics, and also syntax. He has supervised quite a number of master's and PhD candidates on different topics around the areas of language, linguistics in particular, and English. His research interests and publications are around language policy, health communication, language in education policy, and also language planning at local government. And currently, he is the director in the School of Languages and Communication Studies. As your area of interest, Dr. Rammala, maybe just to start by reflecting on what Tata Mandela once said, that if you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. If you talk to him in his language, that goes to his heart. What a very important statement indeed. And I'm sure in your line of work, you can share more about this. But reflecting on Mme Charlotte Mannya-Maxeke, amongst the many of her talents and attributes was also the fact that she was very active in literacy and literary work. I mean, who can forget that she was passionate about issues of multilingualism? And one such example being in her publications, her publication that she wrote in isiXhosa, Umthetheleli Wabantu, actually where she spoke a lot in that publication around the plight of women. And we know that Sepedi was her mother tongue, but she was able to move to the level of publishing in another indigenous language. I mean, I'm sure we can learn a lot from that. So the issue of language and power in particular being so closely associated, particularly in the culture of resistance, in the culture of racial oppression, and many other aspects in terms of our history. We know that the 1976 uprising mainly was the issue against teaching in Afrikaans in our secondary school. Multilingualism also was supposed to be a catalyst for a better democratic change, and that should serve as a valuable resource for social cohesion and economic success of the Rainbow Nation. Dr. Ramala, in your reflections, particularly if you focus on learning and teaching, do you think all spheres of government and also academic institutions are doing enough in the preservation and promotion of indigenous and marginalized languages? I would just like to request that as you make your reflection, just look at that. We have made positive progress? Do you think there are challenges? Are we doing enough? Do we still need to do more? And if so, what are those aspects that we need to focus on?
Thank you very much, Ms. Mufamadi, for the good introduction. I'm going to try and present. Can everybody see my slides?
Yes, I can see. I hope everybody can see.
Thank you very much. Let me start by saying that the importance of multilingualism and the importance of mother tongue in this country cannot be overemphasized. South Africa has a very balanced constitution and a very attractive national language policy framework. But the question that comes up is, if our constitution is so well spoken, if our national language policy is so attractive, since 1996, has there been any country that tried to imitate what we have in those two documents? What then makes it so difficult for South Africa to implement the constitution and specifically the language policy? I'm going to speak about the importance of mother tongue and how it is treated in this country by the government and our academic institutions. Mother tongue education in this country is a highly contested terrain of the 21st century, and it is considered a waste of time if the interests of people, the plan, the power, and the business are not aligned. In a recent article, Makocha, Mutasa, and Ramala made suggestions regarding the way forward to African academics implementing mother tongue education in primary and secondary schools, as well as in colleges and universities. Mother tongue education has been debated extensively, but with little effect on language policies. Ineffective efforts to introduce mother tongue education have negatively affected people's lives. The example of Tanzania, the imposition of Kiswahili in the education sector has done an untold amount of as yet undocumented damage to the local indigenous languages of that country. Now, mother tongue education elicits a mixed bag of sentiments among educators involved in primary, secondary, and tertiary education. There are optimists who perceive mother tongue instruction as a savior that will end poor academic performance among learners. The pessimists, on the other hand, see mother tongue instruction as sounding the death knell for quality education. Some philosophical questions that beg to be answered are the following. Who is interested in mother tongue learning? What is the position of the person who is pursuing mother tongue learning? In South Africa specifically, with its multilingual nature, which of the many mother tongues that coexist should be selected? Which criteria for language selection should be used to avoid running the risk of tribalism, racism, and discrimination in education supply, provision, and accessibility? Now, there are common challenges to mother tongue education, a number of challenges common to mother tongue education whenever it is implemented in Africa. This includes source ownership on the part of the African economies. It also includes technological achievements, the hegemony of the English language, the limited terminology related to means of industrial production, and the language alienation by the African elites, and the paucity of literature to support mother tongue education, in addition to political portfolios and postmodernist concepts. The other key challenges are attitudes towards local languages and the hegemony of geographically, politically, economically, and or religiously powerful languages. Economically, the state of the economy in a country determines the strength of the language policies that are applied there. English dominates the world because of the resource power held by English-speaking nations, according to Bangboche. Now, resource shortages have affected the implementation of mother tongue education policies and the use of local languages in related sectors like law, religion, and trade in this country. Now, politically, we find that politicians influence mother tongue education policy implementation in a number of ways. In any given country, politicians are the de facto leaders of all programs, and what they say has the greatest chance of being acceded to by the majority. In many cases, however, they lose people's trust because they pay only lip service to policies. When they address people, despite the nature and content of their audience, they do so mainly in English in South Africa, as we do in this webinar. The implementation of mother tongue teaching in Africa and in South Africa in particular needs commitment and dedication. For it to be a success, it must start with schools where learners will grow up with the required language competency and proficiency. Reinforcements of local languages only at university level, it's a waste of students' time because by the time children get to university, they are more focused on learning practical life skills. Thus, to them, concentrating on the issue of language simply represents an additional burden. Apartheid language policies, together with political and socio-economic policies, gave rise to a hierarchy of language inequalities, which is reflected in the structures of racial and class inequalities that characterize the current South African society. These practices engender the corollary status of the indigenous languages and their varieties for the African community and other marginalized groups, including the deaf and those who cannot hear correctly. Now, languages, the language issues are aspects of social linguistics. People are largely products of their society, and as members of a particular society, they accept and assimilate to its language, values, faith, expectations, laws, and customs. Culture as a way of life of a group of people influences the individual's own way of life. As a result, the implementation of a language policy cannot be explained solely in economic terms, since it's also a function of culture and social change. It must be noted, however, that culture is not static, it keeps on changing. Also falling under this issue are certain observable social trends that affect the implementation of language policy in South Africa. These include urbanization, level of education, and the changing roles of women. They affect language policies in terms of status and corpus planning. Now, the orientation of language as problem is associated with issues of development and modernization in national context, where questions of literacy, code selection, standardization, orthography need to be sorted out. An assumption that is basic to the language as problem orientation in some circles is that multilingualism leads to national divisions, while English monolingualism may ensure national unity. I'm not sure how truthful this can be, but in the context of our country, viewing language as a problem connects education with other social problems, such as unemployment and low educational achievement on the part of indigenous Black people, and is often viewed as a cause of social problems. In other words, languages other than English and Afrikaans were viewed as problems to be overcome. Besides social problems, the maintenance of low status first language is fraught with intellectual limitations, linguistic deficiency judged by the absence of English, provincialism, and irrationality. Now we have the notion of language as right. The perception that language rights are about the redress of past wrongs has had negative effects on efforts to gain broad public support for the teaching and maintenance of language other than English in most countries, notably in the US. Ray's notes, on the one hand, that while a resource orientation in language planning is not without its problems, a fuller development of a resource-oriented approach to language planning could help to reshape attitudes about language and language groups. Recenter views the language as resource orientation approach as not ascribing lower status to heritage languages. I highlighted heritage languages here because in all of the literature, a heritage language is a mother tongue which is not used by the people who are supposed to use it because it's taken to be a minority language and therefore it must be saved from extinction, but rather as giving marginal recognition to essentially unquantifiable resources associated with language. For example, psychological, cultural, affiliation, aesthetic, and historical aspects. In light of the above, Race contends that a language-as resource orientation is an alternative to a language rights approach. Hence, an emerging polity such as South Africa has adopted both orientations in its language planning strategy, so that the two orientations can complement each other, and it regards the legal context as essential to language development. That is according to the Department of Education in this country. We have a national language policy framework in this country, and the framework should have taken into consideration the fact that Africa is a continent with numerous languages, and therefore there should be a system of managing the multilingual population we house in the country. Our many African brothers and sisters, when it comes to South Africa, they have to be controlled under our present language policy framework, and they ultimately resort to speaking the one colonial language. Now, the language policy should also make pronouncements of which languages may be used for both inter and intra-communication with other states in Africa, something we do not have in our national language policy framework. The emphasis of the national language policy framework on the use of 11 official languages appears as an internal mechanism that privileges the speakers of such official languages or the hidden intention to pursue the colonial legacy of using English, which is not in line with the multilingual and multicultural nature of the country and the continent. Now, One of the characteristics of our language policies in Africa is that we have negative perception of multilingualism. The fact that there are many languages is often used negatively to suggest that this is a distinct disadvantage, especially from the point of view of communication and cost. Compared with a single language, which is widely spoken, a multiplicity of languages is assumed to be problematic, since it's possible that there may be no shared language. This argument, however, ignores the fact that there are languages spoken by millions of speakers and that there are many people in Africa who speak 2 or more languages. Hence, bilingualism or multilingualism will indeed aid cross-linguistic communication. Besides, when people talk of a common language that will facilitate communication, they almost always refer to an official imported language, which, as is well known, is only truly common to perhaps 10 to 20% of the population. The argument about cost is that operating in a single language is more economical than operating in several languages. Now, the law status according to African languages is often based on the requirement that they need to be developed to cope with domains in which they are hitherto not used. For example, there may be a need to reduce the language to writing or to reform and harmonize an existing orthography, as well as produce materials in the language for use in schools. In the case of languages that already have a written tradition, it may be necessary to expand their vocabulary by creating terminology to serve adequately in wider domains. This is one area where South Africa is still lacking. While it is true that use of language in newer domains requires language development efforts, the commonly held view that certain languages cannot be used to express concepts adequately in certain domains is false. The trite linguistic truism that there is no concept that cannot be expressed in any language, provided the need to do so arises, holds good today as it was before. Now, as far as language is concerned, the concept of national integration is linked to multilingualism and the myth of divisiveness, which is that one language unites and many languages divide. Given this myth, it's understandable why African languages are given low status in comparison with imported official languages, which are believed to unite different ethnic groups from the point of view of communication and government. As mentioned earlier, such alleged unifying function is superficial, since it only involves a minority who are competent in the official language. The challenge of integration is met with language policies intended to foster nationalism. This response has come to be seen in terms of 3 approaches: the status quo, the gradualist, and the radical approaches, according to Bamboshe. The status quo approach is a favorite one in that it does not disturb existing practice. Now, modernization is the quest for rapid technological and industrial development with a view to not being left behind in the modern world. Post-independence African leaders were so much concerned with the idea of modernization that they were willing to sacrifice the roles formerly occupied by their languages. Hence, modernization was a strong factor in diminishing the status and roles of African languages. The general belief was that modernization was best achieved in an imported official language. The reason for this is that such a language is already widely used in science and technology, and hence the experience gained in the use of the language can be copied, particularly through transfer and technology. However, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of the purpose of development to equate it narrowly with physical and economic development. While most of the factors discussed earlier may be regarded as beyond the control of speakers of a language, the question of attitudes is squarely within the power of those who own the language. One would have expected speakers of an African language to be proud of their language, but quite often one encounters negative attitudes. The most common of such attitudes is that of the elites who prefer education in the imported language for their children. Taking their cue from the elites, it is not surprising that parents belonging to lower social groups also want similar education for their children. For example, in some countries like South Africa, it's amazing to find the large number of English medium private nursery and primary schools offering education to young children. Patronage of such schools comes not only from well-to-do parents, but also from many lowly paid blue-collar workers who believe that they are making a great sacrifice for their children's future. Ideally, proper language planning should ensure that all languages have a definite status and specified roles in a multilingual setting. In this country, we only have selected official languages and left the other languages without giving them any statuses whatsoever, whether regional or local or whatever. We are only satisfied with 11 official ones. Now, the situation in most African countries, however, is that language planning processes are defective. Commonly encountered situations include policy deficit, usually referred to as absence of policy, propaganda policy, or a non-implementation and lack of political will. The political will is one very serious cause for South Africa to fail to implement multilingual policies. And of course, the policies that we construct may be published without an implementation plan. Therefore, it will not be useful to have such a policy implemented, because the hidden intention was to have a good policy for compliance, but without any intention or preparation to have them implemented. Things fall apart, colleagues, and the center cannot hold. Thank you very much.
Indeed. Thank you, Dr. Ramala, for such an elaborate presentation, particularly emphasizing the significance of multilingualism, but also clearly outlining some of the challenges and lack of will by the power that be, but also relating the unwillingness to socioeconomic challenges between the haves and the have-nots, amongst others. I'm sure we'll unpack further during our deliberations. I'll move right to the next panelist, who's our last panelist for this session, Father Smangaliso Mkachwa, who was a General Secretary of the Southern African Catholic Bishops' Conference, who also held a position as the Executive Director of the Johannesburg-based Institute of Contextual Theology, which published the famous Kairos document, who in 1983 founded the United Democratic Front movement with other prominent activists. But also, as we may remember, he became the executive mayor of Tshwane in 2000 and was also elected the president of the continental organization called the United Cities of Local Governments in Africa. He has also served in the first Democratic Parliament in 1994, and he served as chairperson of various parliamentary committees. He is the founder of the Moral Regeneration Movement and also serves as its current chairperson. Father Mkachwa, some people say that education is a deliberate process of drawing out learning, encouraging and giving time to discovery. But also they would argue that education is concerned with learning that we set out to encourage, which is a process of inviting truth and possibility. It is also based on certain values and commitments, such as respect for others and also for truth. As we indicated earlier on, sadly, South Africa is also facing challenges of corruption, of maladministration, and gender-based violence, as we have articulated. Can you please maybe reflect on issues around ethics and societal values, but also maybe, as I reflected earlier on, the Ubuntu philosophy as a vehicle to solve societal challenges, but also one would dare say a vehicle to solve not just societal issues, but socio-economic and political challenges. And how do we regenerate the moral compass of a society, particularly its leadership, and leadership in its entirety, be it traditional, political, business, and also the clergy, as we have seen many challenges also amongst the clergy? Would you please reflect on some of these aspects? Father Mkacho? Can admin check if he's still connected?
We shall do so.
I see Madam Mkacho is online. Hold a few minutes with the team.
Chair.
Father, can we try again?
Program Director. Thank you, Program. It is very hearing. Welcome, Father Mkacho. There seem to be two instruments working in your space. Your cell phone and your laptop are currently on. You kindly switch off the one that you are not going to be using. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, kindly bear with us. This will be resolved shortly. Bear with us as we work with the esteemed elderly. Madam Kachwa, you seem to be okay now. The item that you're using, the instrument that you're using is on mute. If you're using your laptop, you can unmute it. Yeah, we still cannot hear your audio. You're still on mute, Madam Kachwa. We can see you talking, Madam Kachwa, but we cannot hear your audio. From our side, it indicates that you're on mute. IT, can you please unmute? Can you please unmute Madam Kachwa, the relevant instrument that he's supposed to be talking through? Thank you. Madam Kachwa, Program Director.
Can someone
It seems we're struggling with connectivity issues. Are we winning, Mr. Lloyd?
We're unfortunately with Madam Kachwa because there's a terrible echo that comes from the background showing that there are two devices in his space. Can we, in the meantime, our IT has also tried to assist him to switch off the other device, but I think they're struggling as well. Could we, in the meantime, perhaps go to the Q&A section and entertain the questions and the comments?
Yes, that's what I think we need to do. The question from the emancipation of women and girls is in actual fact within their own reach. What are we as women doing for us today? Despite how inadequate they may seem, how do successful and self-sufficient women do to assist others to get to where they want to be? Is it that women are restrained by their own mindset and by their past oppressive beliefs? How do they then unlock that intellect, wisdom, power, and bravery within and break the chain of their own bondage? I'm going to throw this to our two panelists. Ms. Vapela, do you want to take that? And then I'm sure Dr. Ramala can come in as well. Ms. Vapela, are you able to hear us?
I see Ms. Vapela may not be able to hear us at the moment. Program Director, Ms. Mufmadi, I see a hand is up of an attendee that is Mulale Shuping. I do know that attendees are not able to unmute themselves where they are. We could probably advise Shuping to post his comment or question in the Q&A room.
Are you back now? I think Dr. Amala, in your presentation, you spoke about the challenge of mother tongue as a contested terrain, and you indicated that the plan, the power, and the business is not aligned, and the environment is not conducive at the moment in terms of how things are conceptualized to promote mother tongue. Do you care to elaborate on that?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Mufamadi. Am I audible on your side?
Yes, you are.
Thank you. The reality is, people in Africa have a problem of the respect of the over-dominant English language and other foreign languages which were colonial languages. The good theories that we sell, the good plans that our government puts on the table, they are interpreted and well understood, but left to rot without being implemented. Now, there are a few people in every country who might have interest in the implementation of a particular language policy if they see something good in it, like the multilingual policies that we use specifically in education. But now, those people ultimately get discouraged when the rulers of the country, when the politicians do not practice what they preach in the policies. When universities are requested to submit multilingual language policies, they all do so, but most of us, we do it for the sake of compliance with the request from the department and from the government. Now, on the ground, people still believe that since our politicians send their children overseas to study in English and come back better, since rich people send their children to multiracial schools where only English is taught in a so-called multiracial institution, even poor people sacrifice the little money that they have because the belief is, once my child speaks good English, learns in English, he will be having more chances for the future. When we interview candidates for employment positions, regardless of the position to be held, we also still go on and use the English language. Now, what we do in practice opposes what we do in our many policies and in our many conferences where we sell the importance of these African languages. And from a psycholinguistic point of argument, there is evidence that anybody can learn anything in a better way if they learn using the language they understand the most. And such a language, in my understanding, will be the mother tongue of that particular learner. But then, you go to university, you try to sell the idea of multilingual teaching, and people tell you, who knows that language that you recommend should be used in teaching? What preparations are there for us to start learning Shivenda, Shitsonga, Sepedi, so that I should teach my engineering in that language? Now, practically, after we accepted and drafted these multilingual policies, we have not received the political will in our institutions, in our departments, and everywhere else to say, this is something we're going to do. Advise us as a language planner, where do we start? What do we need to do? Who need to be involved in the implementation of the multilingual language policy? This country announced in 2012 that every department must have a language unit, which is, excuse me, which is under the control of language practitioners, who will be able to assist with interpreting where necessary, who will be able to assist with translations where they are needed, who will also be able to interpret sign language to the people who come for service delivery. But then, depending on the management of those departments, very few language units have been set up until today. The same thing had to happen also with our municipal offices, where there should be a language unit. But then it seems as if after selling the idea of multilingualism, we don't put enough resources to make multilingualism policies to be implemented correctly. Thank you.
Thank you for such an elaborate answer, Dr. Ramala, and certainly some of the points, if we still have time, we will pick up and continue. I'm going back to Ms. Mapela, but particularly the question from Ms. Manamela. Ms. Mapela, there is a question here from the participant who says that the emancipation of women and girls is in actual fact within their own reach. What are we as women do with the opportunities available for us today, despite how inadequate they may seem? How do successful and self-sufficient women do to assist others to get to where they want to be? Is it that when women are restrained by their own mindset and by their past oppressive beliefs? How do they then unlock that intellect, wisdom, power, bravery within and break the chain of their own bondage?
Thank you for the question. I like the last part, or the first part of the last sentence, in terms of unlocking that intellect and breaking from the chain of their own bondage. But importantly, recognizing that we get restrained by our own mindset. We can achieve as much as we achieve as long as we put our minds to it. It's just unfortunate that as we are transforming, as we are evolving, we have other priorities. We have other challenges that we have to face. And not just as women, but as the people, as the community. There is so much that we have to fight for, to an extent that when you are expected to be taking somebody with you, you'd rather go fight the battle alone. And as you fight the battle alone, there are other friends that you make within the battle to an extent that you forget those that you have left behind. There is word, or there's this, I don't know whether to call it a word or what, but the issue of black tax. That as a successful person, particularly a black person, you find yourself having to take care of your families. And it so happens that we'd want to bring them the fish to eat instead of showing them where the river is and teaching them how to catch the fish. We have so much created a culture of wanting to give in terms of material things, creating a culture of dependency. And my apologies if I'm going to step on people's toes, but you look at our government system, the grant. it's creating a system of dependency. Why do we not have a system of using the available land that is there, using the available infrastructure that is there to create jobs for people? In my province, there are areas that factory that are standing open. Why is there no deliberate drive, government or even the private sector to have it in their minds, they must invest something in those infrastructures, the women and the youth must come in and get employed or get work. But also the mindset of our people, having to get out of their comfort zone. We've so much created a comfort zone. We are comfortable with what we have today, and we'll live for today. Tomorrow we'll see what we can do. So why don't we come up with a system erring? We will get satisfaction when this tree matures. Why do we want self-satisfaction? So for now, it's all about, to grow another person. It's all about networks, but it's also understanding that for a person to have a certain objective, and that plan might not necessarily be a reward that you're going to get tomorrow. It could be a reward that you're going to get in 5 years' time. And if you want to be part of it, go with it. There are so many opportunities. It's just that we have different priorities and we have different ways of looking at it. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Babala. In just 1 minute, in your presentation, you indicated that it did not take one woman. It was a collective effort during the era of Mme Charlotte Mannya-Maxeke. Do you think the current generation of women are working together? Do you think that spirit of togetherness is there?
The spirit of togetherness is there for as long as we have the same palates. We want to lick the same flavor of ice cream. But for those that have the same objective, that have the same drive, like I said in the presentation, in the villages, there are those support structures, particularly during funerals. If only they could their minds be broadened, their visions be broadened to say that with this kind of stock value, can even go broader. But unfortunately, there are other infiltrating factors where somebody would be raising a head, and there's somebody who would come and either want to take that from the person or even come with something bigger that would thwart the idea of that person. But generally, particularly in the rural areas, there is that spirit of togetherness amongst women. Yes, in the urban areas, we even have built high walls so that we don't know who our neighbor is. We drive in tinted cars. We don't even see the person that is who has parked next to us or stopped at a stop sign next to us. It might be somebody who tomorrow I can get in touch with and have a conversation with. We are so institutionalized to our own self that even in a restaurant, you allow yourself to sit alone in a restaurant as a woman, because we've just created these walls that self and not necessarily looking at the other person. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Babala. Once more, I just want to apologize also on behalf of Fathers Mangaliso Mkachwa, on behalf of the National Heritage Council. Unfortunately, technology got the better of us. We promise we'll do better this time, but it's the challenge that when we are far apart, it's difficult to assist each other in terms of technology, unlike if we were in the same place. Having said that, I think this then brings us to the end of this session. There are a few comments also on the chat regarding the language, where participants are raising many issues in terms of redress, in terms of the lack of the will of the people, and also the need for political and administrative will to promote the use of indigenous languages. I'm now going to hand over to the acting CEO of the National Heritage Council, Mme, to come and do the vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, Mme Mfumadi, the program director. You performed very well. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I would also thank the chairperson of the National Heritage Council, Mr. Edgar Luvalani, for having welcomed everyone to this session, and also for having pricked our mind to remind us that we are there as the National Heritage Council for advising the Minister on policy development in the heritage sector, and which we have told ourselves that this is what we are going to do, because if we fail, it means that the Minister will fail and the department will fail. So we've got to carry out that responsibility of policy development and advice to the Minister. And when you look at heritage, it's a broad field that needs working together. In other words, a heavy sack of locusts that were a good, nutritious, highly nutritious food in the past. You can carry it through hands of others. You could not carry it alone. So indeed, this is what we have to do to assist the Minister and the department. So thanks very much for that. I would also like to thank Mr. Mushwana for having raised pertinent issues, that resolutions are taken but are not implemented, and which is a weak point that we need to revisit. That it can't just be that after taking resolutions, we hold seminars, we hold conferences, but at the end, we do not implement. This is a big weakness that makes us not to, achieve what we can achieve. We have done a lot as government, as the community, as the society, but we lack on on implementation of whatever decisions we have taken. I would also like to highlight what Mr. Mushwana has said, that we must consolidate our working relationship with the universities. And indeed, this is what the National Heritage Council has taken forth, that we need to work very closely with the universities. And from Limpopo, we've already started doing so with the two that are in Limpopo, but we are broadening our wings to other, universities that are there, so that we can have collaboration and working together so that we can achieve more. I would also like to thank Mebapela for having raised, serious issues that Mme Maxeke had done, it's some time ago, a long time ago, that she paved the way for us. And the big question is, are we taking our males, male partners, males in the society along, so that they do understand that it's not now that we are fighting for this space, but many years ago, decades ago, women stood up. Women who had passion to make sure that we have an equal society, that they stood up, challenged us, and rather than reinvent the wheel, they must be partners. And we must not even be shy as women to raise these issues. But it's the responsibility of men to also ensure that Starting from the household, they ensure that we are treated equally. Girl children need to be treated equally with boy children. And I also like families where there's no separation of responsibilities amongst children. That whether it's a boy or a girl, whatever work has to be done, it must be done by all. And if we can move along those lines, it will be easy for us to can achieve gender equality, as well as in schools. There shouldn't be this separation that these are the responsibilities of boys, these are the responsibilities of girls. Because in that way, we are engendering, we are planting more seeds of segregation and sexism. So the more equal we treat our children and make them aware that it's important to be treated equally, then it means that we will finally win this pandemic. Sometimes it's so painful. It's so painful that when you look at what women face, in terms of, violence, all these wrong malice, it's so painful that we come a long way. Just check when was Mme Maxeke running in the forefront of these challenges that we need to overcome them. And even now, we are struggling. So what does that mean? Does it mean that we are not willing to change our mindset? Or what is happening with us? Or is it because we think that, yes, these things, they are there naturally and need to happen? So these are some of the things that we need to change, the stereotypes that we have. And unfortunately, people do them, I think unconsciously. But the scourge of gender violence, it's becoming too much on us as women and children. And it becomes more painful when you look at the elderly women who would be abused by great-grandchildren. And once those great-grandchildren are arrested, the following day they are back home. They are released on bail, and which is, imagine if an old woman of 80-something years sees the great-grandchild coming back from prison after being arrested. There you are. You've got to sleep in the same house with this child who will even threaten you. So these are some of the challenges that we say violence against women, it's something both women and men. And as long as men do this thing of sexism, in a pretext way, silently, it means that we are not going to win over this. But it also says, as women, we need to fight for our space. We need to fight for the space of young women and young children. I also appreciated it when you indicated that, after almost 27 years, I think, yes, it's 27 years or 26 years that we have the first women Auditor General. That's too long. That's too long that it's the first time we have it. So it means that as women, we must go back to the basics. We must go back to the trenches and say, no, we need to change the status quo. Women have capability and they must be recognized for their capability because by nature, they are nurturing, they are caring. So they need to be given that space because we can't continue complaining about the second pandemic of gender violence. We can't. So these things, some of these things are done, subtly, that they cannot be recognized by those who are not gender vigilant. I must also thank Dr. Ramala for, the encouraging words when you said that mother tongue is highly contested and we need to ensure that we protect mother tongue. That's true. That's true. You go to early learning centers, you go to primary schools, even the poor, like you have indicated, they want their children to be educated in English. And the big question is, where is Africanism disappearing? Where is it disappearing? And why should we allow it to disappear? Because we don't even speak our indigenous languages with these children so they grow up learning English better than their own indigenous languages. And it's seen to be a status that if they don't speak English, it means therefore that they are not well educated or they are better off. And it's the wrong things that we are implanting on these children. So I think we need to encourage our society that we need from time to time speak to our children, not only during the Heritage Month that we talk about, our African tradition, our African heritage. It must be something that we talk about throughout the year. So we need to change our attitudes, like you have indicated, Doctor, that we need to change it so that English shouldn't be taken as the language, that if you don't know it, then it therefore means that you cannot comprehend anything. And I know that it's a contested terrain, but like you indicated, lack of political will, it's where the main challenge is. But also even the recipients, our societies, even if there can be policy, but they think English is the key to open up ways for you for the future. And we need to change, that thinking. I would also like to appreciate what you have said, Program Director Mme Mufumadi, that women need to take this thing up upon themselves. But I have also indicated that we should not leave our men behind. We shouldn't. Because when we leave them behind, they think that it's a women's issue. So why should we worry about it? Why should we worry about it? And instead, they will feed negative attitudes to our children. So these are some of the things that we need to hold our hands together. Le phologolo e leng gore ke phologolo e tshabiwang fela ga re kgaogane re ka se kgone gore re fete re fenya. So go botlhokwa gore ga re tshwaraganeng re kgone gore re ka fenya mmogo. Ke re gape ke re mme Bapela o na bua ka kgang ya gore go na le culture ya dependence on government. And this is unfortunate. This is unfortunate that we have taught our people that because you have voted, government must do everything for you. And sometimes it becomes so painful when you look at, yes, it's correct that our economy is not growing at a faster rate, but also what is worrisome is people from the neighboring countries, they come to South Africa because they see opportunities. And once they are here, they make ends meet and they survive. And our people are waiting for a government-created work. They are waiting for work that is created by a factory when they can be given skills to can survive. And I think that's where we are also lacking, that we are not giving the necessary skills to our kids. Our education is not giving them the necessary skills, which can make them survive and create their own jobs. But it was also, highlighting and enlightening when you indicated that, in the former Bantustan areas, there are factories that are not utilized. And in some cases, they are vandalized. And the big question is, why is private sector not investing in those factories? Why are we not strengthening our engagement with the private sector that they must invest there? But also even from government itself. We have a weakness as government that rather than use those buildings that have been there, and in most cases they have been government buildings, we decide to go and rent from the private sector. And those that are strong and have been there for years, having been built for government by government, we do not utilize them. And at the later stage, we sell them to the private sector. Rather than, using them, including our tertiary institutions, to give skills to our people, to use these firms for people to get more work. And maybe we need to go back that we need to engage the private sector. We need to engage politicians. That where can we ensure, how can we ensure that our people get the necessary skills? The necessary skills. You know, go to townships. During COVID-19, government was subsidizing, was coming up with grants for township economy so that it can be revived. But in honest, interrogation of the situation, who are in these township economies? Who are the majority? They are not South Africans. They are people who are coming from our neighboring countries who saw that there is an opportunity in South Africa. And indeed, they will tell you that what we are able to make ends meet with here in South Africa, we are able to survive and we are able to support people back home. And what are we doing as South Africans who are unemployed? Should we continue saying government give grants, government give grants? At the end of the day, how long will government continue to give grants, and how much is the percentage of those who are employed decreasing? Which means it's going to be more burden rather than give people the skills so that they can survive. So in closing, thank you very much to all the participants, to all our guests, and those who've been with us till the end of this session, that they've been there, they've been asking questions, and we thank you. Like I said, thank you a million times for supporting this engagement, and fare thee well. Thank you.
Thank you. Indeed, CEO, such inspiring and challenging words that you left us with. Food for thought for us to reflect as we go forward. Really, we are led in the National Heritage Council. This brings us to the end of our webinar. There were a few issues that were raised. Request, firstly, if it's possible to share the recording with the participants, and also if it's possible to share Father Mkachwa's presentation. I just want to say, as the chairperson indicated, this is a series of webinars and dialogues by the National Heritage Council, and they've committed that they will bring Father Mkachwa in one of their next sessions in the future as well for that. This then brings us to the end of this session. I just want to leave you with the words of Mme Charlotte Mannya-Maxeke again, that this work is not for yourselves. Kill that spirit of the self. Do not live above your people, but live amongst them. And if you can rise, bring someone with you. I think those words are really inspiring, but I also think those words are Ubuntu personified. I thank you. We're looking forward to you joining us in our future sessions as well. The webinar stands adjourned.
Recording stopped.
Thank you very much, Ngaba. Can you kindly exit the rest of the attendees so that we have our wrap-up session?
No problem, sir.